Once upon a time, in a city that never quite slept, there lived a woman the whole continent had learned to envy. Her name was Elara Chukwu, and from the high windows of her estate on Banana Island, she could watch Lagos burn gold at dusk, the lagoon catching fire with the last of the sun, the bridges strung with light like beads on a long dark throat. People drove past her gates and slowed their cars. They pointed, "That is where she lives," they would say. And there was reverence in it, and there was hunger, because Elara Chukwu was not merely rich. She was one of the richest women on the continent, and she had not been born into a single naira of it. The magazines called her self-made, and for once the magazines were telling the truth. She had a husband too, and the husband was the kind of man photographers loved. Marcus Adeyemi, tall, easy in his skin, a smile that opened like a door you wanted to walk through. Together they were what the society pages called the power couple. Elara with her empire and Marcus with his charm, photographed at galas and ribbon cuttings, his hand always resting in the small of her back, as though he had placed it there to hold her up. To the outside world their life was a finished thing, a sculpture with no seams. But Elara had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous lies are the ones that look finished. And something lately was wrong. She could not have said exactly when the wrongness began. It had crept in the way damp creeps into a wall, invisible until the paint begins to lift. Marcus was always busy now, always leaving, always reaching for his car keys with one excuse or another folded neatly into his mouth before she could ask. Meetings, suppliers, a new partner on the mainland who could only see him at strange hours. At first she had not questioned it. She had wanted not to question it. There is a kind of peace a person will pay almost anything to keep, and Elara had paid for hers in years of struggle, and she did not want to spend it cheaply. But as the excuses grew, so did the cold, small thing in her chest that would not be still. That morning, Marcus came down the curved staircase in a sharp blue suit, his cologne arriving in the room a moment before he did. He crossed the marble, took her face gently in one hand, and kissed her on the forehead like a man in a film about a happy marriage.
"Good morning, baby,"
he said, and the smile was perfect.
"Good morning,"
she answered, watching him over the rim of her cup. She set it down.
"You're leaving early again."
"Meetings.
He was already adjusting his cuffs, already half gone.
All day. Don't stress yourself over any of it, my love. I'll handle everything."
"I'll handle everything." He had begun to say it the way other men said "I love you," automatically, as a thing meant to close a conversation rather than open one. Elara smiled faintly and nodded, and let him believe the nod meant what he wanted it to mean. Outside, a car horn sounded twice, short, polite, patient. That would be Zane. Zane Okafor had been her driver for 3 years, and there were people in Elara's life board members, distant cousins who only appeared at Christmas, the wives of important men who would have been astonished to learn how much she trusted him. To them he was furniture in a uniform, a tall, quiet young man who opened doors and carried bags and stood by the car with his hands folded, waiting. They never looked at him long enough to see anything else. Elara had once been guilty of the same blindness, not anymore. Because Elara knew where Zane had come from, and she knew it because she had been standing there when he arrived. He had been 27 then, a first-class graduate of the University of Lagos, economics, the kind of brilliant young man his lecturers had promised a shining future. The future had not arrived. He had searched for work for almost 2 years, and the companies had praised his results and never called back. Some told him plainly that he had no connections, no godfather, no one to make a phone call on his behalf. Others asked for money he did not have, a facilitation fee, a processing fee, envelopes he could not fill. He had watched men with half his ability walk into offices he could not enter, and he had begun, slowly, to understand that the world he had studied so hard to join did not actually want him. And then his mother fell sick. It was sudden and it was cruel, the way these things are. A growth the doctors said would not wait, surgery she could not survive without and they could not afford. Zane had sold what little there was to sell. It was not close to enough. He had stood in the corridor of a public hospital, a brilliant young economist with a useless degree rolled up in his fist, and he had felt the future he had bargained for collapse into a single impossible number on a piece of paper. That was the day fate, or God, or simple desperate chance, walked him into a building where Elara Chukwu happened to be. She had not been looking for a driver. She had been looking for a quiet hour. Her company, by then already large, already climbing, had a satellite office near the hospital, and she had gone there to escape a meeting that had exhausted her. She found Zayn in the wrong reception, having walked into the wrong building entirely, asking a security man whether there was any work at all, because his mother was dying 2 streets away, and he did not know what else to do with his hands. Most people in Alara's position would have called for the man to be shown out, but Alara had once been a girl with a dying caretaker and an empty pocket, and she did not let the man be shown out. She listened. She made him sit. She asked him questions, sharp ones, the kind that find out quickly whether a person is honest. And his answers were so plain and so unbroken that something in her, the part that had been hardened by years of liars, simply believed him. She paid the surgery in full, all of it. She did not haggle, and she did not lecture. And when his mother lived, when the doctors said the worst had passed, Alara did one more thing that no one had ever done for Zayn Okafor. She offered him honest work, not as a favor to be held over his head, as a beginning.
You have a first class in economics. One day you will use it. But today you need to eat. Your mother needs you near. And I need someone by the wheel I am not afraid of. Drive for me. Watch, learn. The rest will come.
He had wept, this grown man, quietly, with his face turned to the window so she would not see. And there, in the silence of that office, Zayn Okafor made himself a promise, not aloud, but bone deep, the kind of vow a man makes when his whole life has just been handed back to him by a stranger who owed him nothing. He would protect her, whatever came, however long it took. He would repay a kindness that could never truly be repaid with the only currency he had, loyalty, total and unwavering. So he had stayed, not because driving was the limit of what he could do, they both knew it was not, but because he could not yet bring himself to leave her side. And as the months turned into years, he had watched. He had a quiet way of watching that people mistook for emptiness. He missed nothing. He simply did not speak of what he saw. To Alara, in the day-to-day of her enormous life, he had slowly become familiar in the way a wall becomes familiar, solid, dependable, easy to stop noticing. She did not see how closely he watched the men who circled her. She did not see how much he understood. She did not see, most of all, the thing he himself worked hardest to bury. That somewhere in those 3 years, his loyalty had quietly grown roots, and the roots had grown into something he had no right to feel and so refused to name. He was 30 now, tall, with the kind of build that made doormen straighten up without knowing why. Deep brown skin, a clean fade above a face that was all angles softened by a neat beard, and eyes that were quiet and very steady. He wore a single gold pendant under his collar, the only thing of any value he owned, a gift to his mother that she had pressed back into his hand on the day she left the hospital alive.
Wear it, so you remember the woman who paid.
He wore it every day, against his chest, where no one could see it but he could always feel it. This morning, as on every morning, he stood beside the car as Marcus came striding out, briefcase swinging.
Morning, Zayn.
Marcus did not look at him. He never really did.
Good morning, sir.
Zayn opened the rear door. Marcus folded himself in, already on his phone, already laughing at something Zayn could not hear. Zayn shut the door with the soft, expensive sound the door was built to make, and walked around to the driver's side, and his face gave away nothing at all. Behind him, in the doorway of the house she had built, Alara stood and watched them drive out through the gates, and a heaviness settled over her chest like a hand. When the car had gone, Alara did not go back to bed, though her body ached for it. She went instead to her study. It was her favorite room in the whole vast house, the one room that was entirely and only hers. The walls were lined with books she had actually read, and between them hung the only photographs she kept where anyone could see them. There was no picture of a father here, because Alara had never known her father. There was no picture of a mother, because the woman who had given birth to her had given her up at the gate of a children's home in Enugu before Alara was old enough to keep her face. What hung on the wall, in a plain wooden frame she had never replaced for a finer one, was a photograph of an old woman with a wide, tired, generous face and a headscarf knotted high. Mama Ngozi. Mama Ngozi had run the home that took Alara in. She had run it on almost nothing. on faith and stubbornness and the small charities of strangers, and she had run it with a love so fierce that the children who passed through it never quite recovered from being loved by her. She had no money to give Alara. She had given her something else. She had taught her to read past her grade, to count past her years, to look a cheating market woman in the eye, and no to the kobo when she was being robbed. And when Ilara, at 19, had scraped together the idea for her very first small business, a tiny trading concern, nothing. A few sacks of goods moved from one market to another. It was Mama Ngozi who had vouched for her to the one man willing to lend her a beginning. Mama Ngozi who had put her own name, her own fragile reputation, on the line for an orphan with nothing but an idea and a hunger. Trust people, Mama Ngozi used to say, in the dim front room of that crowded home, with a dozen children at her feet.
Trust people, my daughter. The world is not made of thieves. But you must always confirm. Love does not excuse you from looking. The day you stop confirming is the day they take everything you have, and they will smile while they do it.
Mama Ngozi had been gone for 6 years now. She had not lived to see the empire. She had lived just long enough to see the beginning of it, to hold Ilara's first real profit in her 2 hands and weep over it as though it were a newborn, and then her heart had simply quietly stopped. Ilara had not failed her since. She had built and built and built in Mama Ngozi's memory until the small trading concern became a logistics firm, and the logistics firm became a holding company, and the holding company became the Chukwu Group, and the Chukwu Group became one of the great fortunes of a continent. Every contract she signed as though the old woman were watching over her shoulder. Did you confirm? Did you look? Are you sure? This morning, she looked. She had not meant to go searching for anything. But the cold thing in her chest would not be quiet. And so she pulled open the long drawer where the most private records were kept. Not the company's records, which an army of accountants tended, but her own. Her personal holdings. The properties she had bought one at a time over 20 years, slowly, the way a hungry woman who has finally found food eats slowly, distrusting her luck. And she found something strange. 3 properties, 3, all of them marked in her own neat hand years ago, with the same single word, not for sale, had been quietly transferred. The paperwork was recent. The signatures were in order. The transfers had been processed, it seemed, with her knowledge and her consent. She had given no such consent. Ilara sat very still with the documents in her lap, and for a long moment she heard nothing but the slow turning of the ceiling fan and the far-off blare of the city beyond her walls. Marcus had handled some of her affairs lately. She had let him. He had asked so gently, so reasonably, "You work too hard, my love, let me carry some of it." And she, exhausted by the endless climb, had been grateful for the help. She had signed things. Of course she had signed things. One signs 100 things a week at her level. She had trusted him to bring her only what was true. Trust people, but confirm.
Oh, Marcus, what are you doing?
She did not yet have an answer. But she had a question now, and Ilara Chukwu had built a continent's worth of fortune on the simple, ruthless habit of following a question all the way down to wherever it lived. She slid the documents back into the drawer, and she did not lock them away in fear. She left them where she could reach them. And she lifted her eyes to the photograph of the old woman on the wall, and she said, the way she had said it 1,000 times before,
I'm looking, Mama, I'm looking.
Movement 2 cracks. Zane noticed things too. It was the great unspoken talent of his life, and the past weeks had given him more to notice than he wanted. It had started small. Marcus would name an office, a destination, a meeting, and then, somewhere along the way, change it. Take the next turn. No, not the bridge. Drop me here. And here would not be an office at all. It would be a hotel, discreet and expensive, the kind with a covered driveway so that the people going in could not be seen from the road. It would be a quiet residential street in an enclave on the far side of the city where the houses sat behind high white walls. And each time, before he stepped out, Marcus would lean forward with that warm conspirator's smile and say the same thing.
You don't need to mention this to Madame. You know how she worries. Let's not stress her, eh? Yes, sir.
And nothing else. He said nothing because it was not his place. A driver does not pass judgment on his employer's husband. A driver who valued his position kept his eyes on the road and his opinions in his throat. And Zane valued his position more than any man alive had ever valued a position, because his position was a debt of honor to the only person who had ever lifted him out of the dust. But each yes sir cost him a little more. That day, Marcus had him stop at a bank on the island, a real errand, for once, or so it seemed. Zane waited in the car at the curb with the engine running soft, and through the half-open window he could hear Marcus on the phone. A few steps away in the shade of the building, his back turned. Marcus did not speak the way a man speaks about business. His voice had gone low and warm, almost sweet, the kind of voice a man uses for one person in the whole world. And Zane knew, with a certainty that turned his stomach, that the person on the other end of that line was not Ilara.
Don't worry. Everything is moving well. Soon I'll have full access to her accounts. Then we won't have to be careful anymore.
Her accounts. Zane's hands closed slowly around the steering wheel until the leather creaked under his grip. He stared straight ahead through the windscreen at the traffic and the heat shimmer rising off the road, and he did not turn his head, and he did not change his face. But something cold and clear was crystallizing inside him, the way water turns to ice slow, and then all at once, and then it cannot be unmade. He wanted to climb out of that car. He wanted to take this charming, smiling man by the collar of his beautiful suit and ask him what exactly he thought he was doing to a woman who had never been anything but good. He wanted more than anything to drive straight back to Banana Island and tell Ilara every word. But he did not, because he could already hear, in his mind, how it would sound. Your driver overheard a phone call. He had nothing but words. He had a half-sentence carried through a car window. Marcus had charm and lawyers and a face the whole city loved. Against that, the word of a driver was less than dust. Worse, if Zane spoke too soon, Marcus would simply have him removed, replaced, sent away from the house and away from the one person he had sworn to guard. And then who would be watching when it mattered? So Zane wrote it down, not on paper, in the careful, patient ledger of his mind, where he had been keeping accounts for weeks now. Bank. The island. Full access to her accounts. A woman on the phone. When Marcus came back to the car, grinning, sliding into the back seat, Zane said, "Where to next, sir?" in a voice as flat and smooth as the road. And Marcus, who never really looked at him, never saw the thing that had hardened behind the driver's calm brown eyes. Back at the house, Ilara had tried to lose herself in work, and her work had refused to take her. She had a desk full of decisions worth more money than most people would see in 1,000 lifetimes, and she could not bring her mind to bear on any of them. Her thoughts kept sliding sideways to the 3 transferred properties, to Marcus's gentle insistence that she rest, to the small lie that her whole house had begun to feel like. It was while moving his newspaper from the breakfast table, an idle, wifely thing, tidying, that the card fell out. It slid from between the folded pages and landed face up on the marble, and Ilara looked down at it and felt the floor of her stomach drop away. A hotel guest card. The key card sleeve of one of the discreet island hotels, the name embossed in gold and printed across the bottom in faint ink, the date of issue. The date was 2 days ago. 2 days ago, Marcus had told her he was in Abuja. He had called her from the airport. He had described in loving detail the dinner he was supposedly having with a delegation she would later be unable to find any record of. Ilara picked the card up with 2 fingers, the way one picks up something that might be alive. Her chest had gone tight, a slow band drawing closed around her lungs. A meeting, she told herself, even now, even with the thing in her hand. Hotels hold meetings. Men take rooms for clients. There is an explanation. She had spent her whole life giving the world the benefit of the doubt, because Mama Ngozi had taught her the world was not made of thieves. But Mama Ngozi had taught her something else too, and that lesson was louder now. She did not confront him. Not yet. She slid the card into the pocket of her robe, and she finished tidying the table with hands that had begun, very faintly, to shake. That night, Marcus came home cheerful. He came home, in fact, in high spirits, laughing, full of a warmth that filled the dining room as completely as his cologne. He hugged her from behind while she stood at the long window. He laughed all through dinner, telling stories about people whose names she half recognized, reaching across the table to refill her wine before her glass was even empty. He was, in every visible way, a man with nothing to hide. and Alara sat across from him and laughed in the right places and ate without tasting and watched him, and was not fooled. Something deep in her, something older than her doubt and far older than her wealth, was whispering now without stopping. The cracks in this perfect life are about to split wide open, and when they do, you must already be standing somewhere safe. She hardly slept. She lay on her side of the enormous bed, listening to Marcus breathe the slow, untroubled breaths of a man whose conscience does not wake him. And she stared at the ceiling and turned the day over and over in her mind. The transferred properties, the hotel card, the 2 days he claimed to have spent in a city he had not been in. She wanted to push the doubts away. They clung to her like burrs. Morning came with the same bright rush as always. Marcus was up before her, already dressed, already perfect, briefcase in hand and charm in his mouth.
Don't wait up for me tonight, baby,
he said, kissing her
Late
cheek on his
meeting.
way to the door.
You know how it is.
Late meeting. You know how it is. I know how it is, she said quietly. Zane was at the car. He opened the door for Marcus the way he always did, silent, steady, invisible. Alara stood in the great doorway of her house and watched the morning swallow them, and the heaviness in her chest had a new weight to it this morning, because the doubts of the night had not burned off with the dawn. They had only grown roots. She turned and went back inside, telling herself she would bury the morning in paperwork. She did not. She sat in her study under the photograph of Mama Ngozi, and she thought, and she watched the gates, and she waited, though she could not have told you yet what she was waiting for. She would not have to wait long. It was late afternoon when Zane returned to the mansion after dropping Marcus at yet another meeting. He parked the car in its place in the wide, quiet courtyard, and instead of remaining outside as he usually would, he found himself walking into the house. He could not have explained, even to himself, what drew him in. Perhaps it was the way Alara had looked that morning in the doorway, small, suddenly, in her enormous, beautiful house, like a candle in a cathedral. Perhaps it was the weight of all the things he had written down in the ledger of his mind, which had grown so heavy lately that he had begun to feel he was carrying them in his actual body, in the muscles of his back and the set of his jaw. He found her in the study. She was sitting behind her desk with papers spread before her, but she was not reading them. She was simply staring through them, her chin propped on one hand, and the lamplight caught the exhaustion in her face, the redness around her eyes, the tightness in her shoulders, the way her whole regal bearing had folded inward like a flower closing against the dark. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. The long braids and curls she wore threaded here and there with small gold beads that caught the light when she moved. She wore no jewelry now, none of the gold she usually carried so easily. She had taken it off, the way a person takes off armor when they think they are alone. She looked, in that moment, not like one of the richest women on the continent, but like a girl who had been hurt and did not yet understand why.
Madam, are you all right?
She startled, looked up, composed herself with the speed of a woman who had spent a lifetime not letting anyone see her bleed.
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you, Zane.
But she was not fine, and they both knew it, and the not fineness sat in the room between them like a third person. Zane should have nodded and left. That was what a driver did. He stood at the threshold, and he meant to do exactly that, to say, "Very good, madam," and turn, and go back out to the car and the courtyard and the long silence of waiting. But the ledger in him was full to the brim, and something in him, some accumulated weight of weeks of watching her suffer in the dark, while a smiling man robbed her in the daylight, something simply gave way. He crossed the room. He did not plan it. His feet were moving before his mind had finished arguing. And before he could stop himself, before any wiser, more careful part of him could seize his arm, Zane Okafor leaned down and kissed Ilara Chukwu directly on the lips. For one heartbeat, the whole world went still. Ilara froze. Her eyes flew wide. For that single suspended instant she did not move at all, and then the instant broke and she shoved him back with both hands flat against his chest, hard, rising out of her chair in a single furious motion.
Zane, what on earth do you think you are doing? How dare you?
I'm sorry, madam.
Sorry? You kissed me in my own house. You are my driver, Zane. For God's sake. Do you want me to call my husband this minute? Do you want me to call the police? I will disgrace you. I will have you thrown out of this gate with nothing, the way you came.
The years of struggle were in her voice now, the hard-won steel. This was a woman who had clawed her way up from a children's home and would let no man, no matter how desperate, touch her without leave.
Have you lost your mind?
Please, madam, please listen to me. It is not what you think. It was not disrespect. I swear it before God. It was the only way I knew to make you stop and look at me and hear me.
Her chest was heaving. Anger and confusion warred across her face. Hear you? Hear you about what? Zayn took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was shaking not with fear of her, but with the size of what he was finally saying out loud.
Madam, I have seen him. I have driven Ogamakos to hotels more than once. He does not go for business. He goes to be with a woman.
He did not look away from her, though it cost him everything to hold her eyes.
I wanted to tell you. For weeks I have wanted to tell you. But how? Who would believe a driver? You would have looked at the way you are looking at me now. As a man who has forgotten his place, and you would have sent me away. And then I would not be here when you need me. So I did the only thing I could think of to make you stop. To make you hear me before it is too late. Forgive me. I needed your full attention. I did not know how else to get it.
She stepped back from him, slowly, until the backs of her legs met the edge of the desk and she gripped it with both hands to keep herself upright. The fury was still there in her eyes, but something else was rising behind it now, something cold and creeping that she recognized, because it was the same thing that had been whispering to her for weeks.
Do you realize what you are saying? That is a terrible accusation against my husband, in my own house.
I know, and I would not say it, I swear to you, madam, I would never say it if it were not true.
For a long moment, silence filled the room. The ceiling fan turned. The city murmured beyond the walls. Alara stared at the tall, quiet man standing before her with his hands finely lowered, and she searched his face the way she had searched 1,000 faces across 1,000 negotiating tables, looking for the flicker, the tell, the small false note that gives a liar away. She found none. She found only a kind of grief and a kind of fear that was not fear for himself.
If this is a lie, Zayn, if you are lying to me, swear to you will end your lies here. Do you understand me? Everything I have, I will turn against you.
It is not a lie, madam, and I am ready to show you proof.
The air between them was heavy as wet cloth. Ilara's whole world had begun, very slowly, to tilt on its axis, and for the first time in 3 years, she truly looked at Zayn Okafor, not as furniture, not as a uniform, not as the quiet man who opened doors and carried bags, but as a man who, it seemed, knew far more about her own life than she did, and who had just risked everything, his job, his honor, the very roof over his sick mother's head, to force her to listen. She did not yet know whether to believe him, but she had stopped, and she had looked, and she had heard him, which was exactly, of course, what he had wanted. He pressed on, because he had come too far now to stop.
Madam, is not only that he is unfaithful.
His voice was careful now, choosing each word like a man stepping across a flooded road on hidden stones.
I think he is planning something worse. I do not know everything. I am only a driver. He does not tell me his plans. But I overhear things. He talks about your businesses, about your accounts, the way he hides things from you, the places he goes that are not the places he says. It is not the behavior of a man who is merely cheating. It is the behavior of a man building towards something. I cannot tell you how far it will go. I only know I could not keep sitting outside in that car, watching you suffer in here in the dark, and say nothing.
Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The 3 transferred properties rose up in her mind. Full access to her accounts, except she had not heard him say it. Only Zayn had heard that. But the properties were real. The hotel card in her pocket was real. The Abuja trip that never happened was real.
You are crossing dangerous lines, Zayn. You should not speak about my husband this way without solid proof.
I have some proof. Not enough. Not yet. But I have seen too many things to keep them inside me any longer. Please, madam. Whatever you decide about me, about what I did just now, at least be careful. Watch what you sign. Confirm what he tells you. That is all I ask.
Confirm what he tells you. The words landed on her like a hand on the shoulder from across 6 years. She almost flinched. He could not have known, he could not possibly have known that he had just spoken Mama Ngozi's creed back to her, in his own words, in this room, beneath the old woman's photograph. But the kiss still burned on her mouth, and her pride still smarted, and she was not yet ready to let either of them go.
Even if everything you say is true, you had no right to touch me. You humiliated me, Zain. In my own home. Do you understand that? Whatever you saw, whatever you know, that was wrong.
His shoulders slumped. For the first time, the steadiness went out of him, and he looked simply tired and ashamed.
I understand. I regret it. I was not thinking clearly. I only wanted you to listen before it was too late. Forgive me, madam.
The silence stretched again. Ilara turned away from him, pressing her palm hard against her forehead, as though she could hold her spinning thoughts in place by pressing on the outside of her skull. Every rational part of her wanted to dismiss him entirely, to file the whole afternoon under the day the driver overstepped, and never think of it again. It would be so much easier. It would let her keep her perfect life one more day. But the seed Zain had planted weeks ago with his averted eyes and his careful silences had already grown in the dark, and it was watered now, suddenly, by everything she herself had found and could not explain.
Go, Zain. Just go. I don't want to hear any more today.
Yes, madam.
And he went, and the door closed behind him with a small, final sound. When it had clicked shut, Ilara sank slowly into her chair, and the strength went out of her all at once. Her heart was still pounding. She told herself fiercely that Zain had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, that he had no business in her marriage, no place in her private life, that a driver who kisses his employer is a man who has lost his sense entirely. And yet, she reached into the pocket of her robe and drew out the hotel guest card. She turned it over in her fingers, the gold name catching the lamplight. She thought of the 3 properties. She thought of the way Marcus had begun, so gently, so reasonably, to ease her out of her own meetings. You work too hard, my love. Let me carry it. She thought of Abuja, the city he had never visited. Could Zain be telling the truth? Or was this only the mad story of a man who had overstepped his place, looking to make himself important? She buried her face in her hands. Nothing felt steady anymore. The whole vast house, every room of it bought and paid for by her own 2 hands, had begun to feel like a stage set, beautiful and false, and about to be struck.
Beyond the walls, the gate buzzed open.
Tires on gravel, the low purr of a returning engine. Ilara lifted her head, wiped her eyes once with the heel of her hand and rebuilt her face. Calm, composed, the face the cameras knew, the face that gave nothing away. She had been rebuilding that face her whole life. She could do it in seconds. Marcus came in, trailing cologne and good cheer, dropping his briefcase by the door, crossing the room to pull her into an embrace before she could even rise.
Baby, I missed you today.
She stiffened only for an instant, only enough that a more attentive man might have felt it. Marcus did not feel it.
How was your day?
He asked, kissing her cheek.
Fine.
She said quietly. He held her at arm's length and smiled down at her, his eyes soft, his whole manner the picture of a devoted husband.
You worry too much, my love. You should have come with me. The new partners would have loved you. But don't trouble yourself. I handled all of it. You just rest. Let me carry the weight for once.
He took her hand in both of his, the way a man does when he has nothing in the world to hide, and he laughed about something small, and his charm filled the room as easily as it ever had. And behind her gentle answering smile, Ilara heard Zain's voice, low and shaking, replaying itself again and again. It is not only that he is unfaithful, I think he is planning something worse. She let her husband hold her hand. She let him laugh. And somewhere deep beneath the ruins of her perfect life, in the cold, clear place where Mama Ngozi's voice lived, a seed of fear finished taking root and began, very quietly, to grow into something that would not be charmed away. The next morning, the long dining table was set the way it was set every morning: toast and fried eggs and a steaming pot of tea, fruit arranged in a bowl that had cost more than the home Ilara grew up in. She sat at one end of it, turning her spoon in slow circles around her cup, not drinking. Marcus came down dressed sharply in grey, kissed her cheek, and took his place opposite her, smiling as though the whole world had been arranged for his pleasure. "Baby," he began, in that light, easy tone of his.
Baby, I've been thinking. You've been looking tired lately. All these reports, these numbers, these endless meetings. It's too much for one person. I don't like watching it grind you down.
Ilara looked up slowly.
Marcus, I'm fine. And I should be in the meetings. You know how I am about my own affairs. I built this with my hands. I don't sit out of it.
Times change, my love. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. That's what I'm for. Let me handle the day-to-day. You step back. Enjoy what you've built. Travel. Rest. Trust me, I can take care of everything.
There it was again, smooth as a coin worn down by handling. Her jaw tightened. Every instinct in her wanted to argue, to tell him plainly that no one, not him, not anyone would ever ease her out of the empire she had bled for. But she swallowed the words whole. Some new, careful animal had woken in her, and it told her to wait, to watch, to give nothing away.
Maybe you're right.
She said softly, and watched something gleam, just for a second, in her husband's eyes. Later that day, when Marcus had gone, Zane met her in the long marble hallway. He spoke carefully, the memory of the study still raw between them, his manner more formal than it had been in years, as though he were trying, by sheer correctness, to make up for the line he had crossed.
Madam, please forgive me again for how I behaved. I will not raise it after this. But I must tell you one more thing. And then you may do with me what you like. Oga Marcus is selling some of your properties. I have seen the documents. In his briefcase, on the seat beside him, while he made his calls. Deeds. Transfer papers. Your name on them, and his signature beneath.
Are you certain, Zane?
Yes, madam. That is why he does not want you in the meetings. It is not to spare you. It is so that you do not see. He wants to control everything before you notice anything.
Then I need proof. Solid proof. Not what you saw through a car window. Not what I suspect. Proof that no court, no lawyer, no clever man can wave away.
That evening, alone, Ilara went back to her study and took out something she had not opened in years, not a ledger of the company's making, but her own. A worn leather journal, the spine cracked from a decade of handling, in which she had kept, in her own hand, the private architecture of her wealth. The holdings no accountant managed, the accounts she had set up quietly and told no one about. The small fortresses a woman who trusts no one builds for the day the world turns on her. She had begun keeping it on Mama Ngozi's advice, and in the very first year. Always keep something they don't know about, my daughter. Always keep a door only you have the key to. The day will come when you'll need to walk through it. She turned the pages slowly under the lamp, and near the back, in ink that had faded to the color of old tea, she found the entry she had half forgotten she'd ever made. Private reserve. Held solely in EC name, not disclosed, not joint, confidential. $5 million, ring-fenced years ago and left to quietly grow. A block of shares in 2 of her own companies, held in her sole name outside the marital pool, outside Marcus's reach, outside everyone's knowledge but hers. She had set it up and let it sleep, the way one buries gold in a field and walks away. She had nearly forgotten it existed. She sat very still, looking at the faded ink, and an idea began to form, slow and careful and cold. If Marcus is greedy, she thought, then I do not need to chase his secrets. I can let his greed do the chasing for me. I will dangle something he cannot resist. I will bait him. And if he reaches for it, if he reaches for money he should not even know exists, then I will have my answer, with no doubt left in it at all. She closed the journal. For the first time in days, the cold thing in her chest had a use for itself. The next morning, Ilara sat in the wide, bright living room with her phone pressed to her ear, pretending to be deep in conversation with her old accountant, a man who was, in fact, not on the line at all. She had chosen the spot with care, the foot of the staircase, where a man coming down could not help but hear. She raised her voice just slightly, just enough.
Yes, those private accounts. The reserve Mamangozi made me setting up years ago, the 5 million held only in my name. Yes, and the shares attached to it. I still have all the documents. I just need to decide what to do with them now. No one else knows. That was always the point.
From the corner of her eye, she saw it happen. Marcus had been coming down the stairs, his tie loose in one hand, his mind plainly on the day ahead, and he stopped. Completely. 1 foot on the lower step, frozen mid-motion, his head turning toward her like a needle swinging to find north. The easy charm fell off his face for just a moment, and what was underneath it was bare and naked and hungry, the look of a man who has just caught the scent of fresh meat on the wind. Ilara let the call run another beat, then ended it casually, as if it had been nothing, as if she had already forgotten it. She set the phone face down on the cushion beside her and turned to him with a soft, innocent smile.
Good morning. You're up.
Marcus descended the rest of the stairs slowly, the smile sliding back onto his face like a mask being refitted. But behind it, his eyes had changed. They were brighter now, sharper, calculating behind the warmth.
My love, private accounts, shares held only in your name. You've never mentioned those to me before. Not once in all this time.
Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to feel it through her hand. She kept her face perfectly serene.
Oh, haven't I? I must have forgotten. It's an old thing, Mamangozi's idea, from when I was just starting out. I barely think about it.
She gave a little shrug, as if it were a forgotten umbrella in a cupboard rather than a fortune. It hardly matters.
Of course. Of course it doesn't.
But his smile had grown wider, and the gleam behind it was no longer a flicker. It was a fire, banked and burning, and Ilara, watching him from behind her own gentle mask, saw it plainly, and knew that the bait had been taken into the mouth. Now she only had to wait for him to swallow. The chance came sooner than she expected, and it came from his own carelessness. That afternoon the great house was hushed with heat. Ilara lay on one of the long sofas in the sitting room with her eyes closed, a thin throw over her legs, her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of sleep. The sun fell through the tall windows and lay across the marble floor in a bright, motionless square. To anyone glancing in, she was simply a tired woman taking an afternoon's rest. She was not asleep. She had never been more awake in her life. She heard Marcus come in. She heard him talking already, low and warm, into his phone, his voice full of the ease of a man who believes himself unobserved. He came almost into the room, and then, seeing her there on the sofa, he paused. She kept her breathing even, her face slack, every muscle disciplined into the soft helplessness of sleep. After a moment, she heard him step back, out through the open doors and onto the wide balcony beyond, to be safe, to be sure she could not hear. He was certain she could not hear him now. He was wrong. The balcony doors stood open to let in the breeze, and the breeze carried his voice back to her in pieces, then in whole sentences, then in everything. Yes, it's true, Marcus was saying, and there was a low triumph humming under the words. She told me herself today. 5 million in that reserve and shares on top of it, hidden shares in her name only. You know what that means? Ilara did not move so much as a hair. Her mind raced to keep pace with her ears.
It means we take everything. We start the transfers slowly. Small movements first, so the bank flags nothing. We drain the reserve a little at a time. No alarms, no questions. By the time she notices anything is wrong, we'll be gone, and there'll be nothing left to find. Then we move the shares into the shell company before she even thinks to look. She has no idea. She still looks at me like I'm her whole world.
From the phone, faint and warm, a woman's voice answered. Ilara could not make out the words, the distance and the walls swallowed them, but she caught the shape of them, the soft, pleased curl of them, and she caught once clearly the name Marcus used. Bianca, he said, fond and low.
Bianca, trust me on this. You know I love you. Don't worry about a thing. I'll have it done within the week. The bank officer is mine. He owes me. He'll move it through without a single question.
The woman's voice again, a question in it. And then Marcus's tone dropped further, and what came out of him next stopped Ilara's heart in her chest.
And if she gives any trouble, If she causes trouble, we make it look like an accident. You know how easily people believe these things. A heart gives out. A woman slips at the edge of her own pool, all alone in that big house. Believe me, once she's gone, the lawyer signs the papers without a second thought. Everything comes to me. And then it's just you and me, and the money, and the life we talked about. No more hiding, no more careful. Just us.
The word accident drifted through the bright, still room and landed in the center of Ilara's chest like a dark bird folding its wings. She slid back against the cushions by a fraction of an inch, no more, every instinct screaming at her to hold still, to make no sound, to give nothing away. The world had narrowed to the soft murmur of her husband's voice and the slow, heavy tick of the wall clock above the mantel. Her vision swam. For one terrible moment, the bright square of sunlight on the floor seemed to tilt and slide, and she thought she might faint right there, might give herself away with the sound of her own body collapsing. She did not faint. She pressed her hands silently flat against the seat of the sofa and breathed, slow, deep, soundless through the wave of cold that rolled up her spine and broke across her shoulders. Her face had gone white. Her knees, even lying down, had turned to water. She wanted to scream. She wanted to leap from the sofa and run out onto that balcony and tear the phone from his hand and throw it from the railing and grab him by the front of his beautiful shirt and demand that he explain himself, explain how the man she had married could stand in her own house and plan her murder as easily as ordering lunch. But she did not move. Panic would not save her. Screaming would not save her. She needed proof. Solid, undeniable, the kind even Marcus's lawyers and bankers and friends in high places could not make vanish. Without it, the world would simply decide she had imagined the whole thing, a grieving, paranoid wife. Or worse, they would believe him over her, the way the world so often believes a charming man over a wronged woman. So she lay still and she listened, and she let it cut her open.
You'll see. By next month we'll be free. The house, the cars, all of it, yours. Ours. Of course. 3 children, 4, however many you want. With you, not with her. You know that. You've always known that.
Another pause, and a small laugh, and a promise, a new dress, a trip abroad, somewhere far, somewhere they could disappear into and never be found. Then at last he said,
Yes, I won't fail you.
And the call ended, and she heard him fold the phone away and turn back toward the house. Ilara kept her eyes closed. She made her breathing slow and even. She lay there, a sleeping woman in a square of sun, while her husband walked back past her toward the stairs, and she did not let so much as an eyelash move until his footsteps had faded all the way up and away. Then, and only then, she opened her eyes. The ceiling was very white. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a bird called once and went silent. Her mind felt scraped raw, hollowed out, ringing like a struck bell. But beneath the shock already, something else was rising slow and cold and absolutely steady. The same thing that had carried a parentless girl out of a crowded children's home and up, hand over hand, into an empire. The thing in her that did not break. The thing in her that built. He thinks I am the biggest fool on the face of the earth, she thought, and the thought did not waver. He has been sitting at my table, sleeping in my bed, planning my death and laughing about it. He thinks I will never know. He thinks I will go quietly, like a candle pinched out between 2 fingers. She rose from the sofa. Her legs held. She smoothed the throw, folded it neatly over the arm, set the room exactly to rights, because if he came down again and found anything disturbed, anything out of place, anything in her face that did not belong on the face of a woman who had slept, then everything would be lost. She walked, calm and unhurried, to the study. The leather journal lay where she had left it. She sat down at the desk and opened it to the faded entry. Private reserve. Held solely an EC name. Confidential. And she touched the old ink with one fingertip, the way one touches a map that shows the way out of a dark country. Proof, she whispered to the empty room. I need proof. For a moment she thought of the police. She let the thought come and turned it over and set it down again. Without proof, the police might laugh in her face. Or worse, Marcus had friends in banks and friends in courts, and a charming man with friends in courts can make a story disappear, can turn an accuser into the accused, can have a loyal driver arrested for the crime of telling the truth. No. She could not run to anyone yet. She had to beat him at his own game, on her own ground, on her own terms. And so a plan began to take shape in her, slow and careful, brick by brick, the way she built everything. She would pretend she had heard nothing. She would smile across the table at him. She would let him believe, right up until the last possible moment, that he had won, that she was exactly the ignorant, trusting woman he took her for. And while he believed it, she would move quietly in the dark, gathering everything. The bank records, the transfer notices, the messages, the testimony, the proof. She would need help. She would need someone she could trust absolutely, someone who could watch and follow and record what she could not. She thought of Zayn. She thought of his face in this very room, the recklessness of the kiss, yes, but also what had been underneath it. The grief, the fear that was not for himself, the way he had risked his job, his honor, the roof over his sick mother's head, to force her to listen before it was too late. He had crossed a line, and she had not forgiven him for it. But she understood now, with the cold clarity of someone whose life depends on judging people correctly, that whatever else Zayn Okafor was, he was loyal. Bone deep, unbought, the loyalty of a man repaying a debt of honor. Marcus had 1,000 friends, and not one of them would weep at her funeral. Zayn had no one but his mother and her. She breathed in and felt that small, cold strength settle deeper into her chest. The fear was still there, thick and heavy and real, but underneath it now was something older and harder, the memory of an old woman's voice in a dim front room, telling a hungry orphan to count the money twice, to look the world in the eye, to be the steward of whatever she was given. Trust people, but confirm. She stood and smoothed her dress, and in the hallway she passed the long mirror and caught her own reflection, a woman whose eyes were tired but suddenly, terribly clear. "You won't die quietly," she told the woman in the glass.
You will fight, and you will win.